I'm Jessica Miller, 28 years old, and after 4 years as an Army medic overseas, I was finally heading home for Christmas. My stomach fluttered with excitement. The first holiday with my mom since enlisting. My parents divorced when I was 14, and Dad moved away, becoming almost a stranger. As I waited at the airport for my connecting flight, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. Before I tell you what that message said and how it changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If my story resonates with you, please hit like and subscribe as I share how a single message altered the course of my homecoming. Growing up in Cedar Springs, Michigan meant small-town warmth and security. Until I was 14, our family was picture perfect. Mom baking cookies, Dad coaching my softball team, and our golden retriever Rusty completing our Norman Rockwell painting. Mom taught second grade at the local elementary school, while Dad ran a moderately successful construction company. Every Christmas, we'd cut down our own tree from Wilson's tree farm and spend the evening decorating it with ornaments I'd made. Throughout my childhood, each one cataloging my growth from clumsy handprints to more sophisticated crafts. Everything changed during my freshman year of high school. The 2008 recession hit our town hard, and Dad's business suffered catastrophic losses. The arguments started small, whispered tensions about bills that escalated into full-blown shouting matches after they thought I was asleep. 3 months after my 14th birthday, Dad moved out. 6 months later, he relocated to Ohio for a job opportunity, and our once close relationship began its slow death by distance. Mom, Karen Miller, was devastated but resilient. She picked up extra tutoring hours, cut coupons religiously, and somehow kept our house despite the financial strain. We downsized Christmas, birthdays became modest affairs, but she never let me feel the full weight of our new reality. "We're Miller women," she'd say with fierce pride. "We bend, but never break." Meanwhile, Dad, Robert Miller, became a voice on the phone, then texts, then simply a Christmas and birthday card with increasingly generic messages. The cards always contained money, which Mom would grudgingly deposit into my college fund. "Your father loves you," she'd insist, though her tight expression suggested complicated emotions beneath her words. I stopped asking about him eventually, finding it easier to focus on the parent who remained. My senior year of high school brought college application anxiety and an unexpected recruiting visit from Army Sergeant Daniels. The military had never been on my radar, but the education benefits caught my attention. Mom was horrified when I brought home the brochures. "You could get killed, Jessica," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I could also get an education without drowning in debt," I countered. "And purpose, and skills." What I didn't say, I could escape this town where everyone knew my father had abandoned us, where teachers gave me sympathetic smiles and friends' parents invited me for extra dinners. I called Dad to tell him my decision. The call lasted 4 minutes. "Be careful," he said. That was it. No attempt to talk me out of it, no paternal concern, just 2 words that felt like another abandonment. Basic training was hell and salvation simultaneously. My body ached constantly, but my mind grew sharper, more focused. When I qualified for medic training, I found my calling. Blood and trauma didn't faze me. I was good in crisis, steady-handed, when others panicked. I thrived in the structured environment, earning commendations and respect. My first deployment came faster than expected. Afghanistan, then Iraq. War zones transformed theoretical training into visceral reality. I treated gunshot wounds, blast injuries, severed limbs. Some soldiers survived because of my quick actions. Others died despite everything I tried. Each loss carved something from me. Each save restored a piece. Through it all, letters and care packages from Mom arrived faithfully. Homemade cookies that arrived as crumbs, local newspaper clippings, photos of Rusty growing gray around his muzzle. Dad sent occasional texts. "Hope you're safe. Merry Christmas. Happy birthday." each message like a postcard from a distant acquaintance rather than my father. My unit became my substitute family. Staff Sergeant Rivera taught me dominoes and shared stories about his grandmother in Puerto Rico. Lieutenant Parker protected me from an overly aggressive contractor and never mentioned it again. Specialist Washington and I developed an elaborate handshake that evolved with each month deployed. These people knew my fears, my strengths, my breaking points in ways my biological family never would. 4 years passed this way, with brief visits home on leave, where Mom and I pretended everything was normal, though the distance between my civilian and military lives grew wider with each return. During my last deployment, I received a promotion to Staff Sergeant and an opportunity for extended leave during the holidays. For the first time in 4 years, I could spend Christmas at home. I spent weeks preparing, buying gifts for Mom from exotic bazaars near base, planning surprises to make up for missed holidays. Mom's excitement poured through our video calls. "I'm making all your favorites," she promised, "and I've kept every ornament you ever made. The tree is going to be hideous with sentimentality this year." I didn't mention I'd also bought a small gift for Dad, a handcrafted leather wallet from a local artisan. It was an olive branch I wasn't sure I wanted to extend, but something in me needed to try. As my departure date approached, I felt both eagerness and anxiety. The person returning wasn't the same girl who'd left. I'd seen and done things that had fundamentally changed me. Would home still feel like home? Would Mom recognize the harder edges I'd developed? These thoughts occupied my mind as I packed my bags and prepared for the journey back to American soil. The Atlanta airport buzzed with holiday travelers as I slumped in an uncomfortable chair at gate B-23. My connecting flight to Grand Rapids had been delayed twice already, and exhaustion tugged at my bones. 48 hours of travel from our forward operating base had left me disoriented, trapped in that strange limbo between military and civilian life. My uniform attracted occasional glances, some respectful, others curious, a few uncomfortable. I'd changed out of my combat fatigues into my service dress uniform for the journey home, a visual bridge between my worlds. I checked my watch, still 3 hours before the rescheduled departure. My body clock was thoroughly confused, having crossed multiple time zones. The fluorescent lights and constant announcements made rest impossible. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, smiling at images of my childhood home decorated for past Christmases, modest but always warm. Mom had promised to go all out this year, threatening to place a light-up reindeer on our roof despite her fear of heights. The notification sound interrupted my reminiscing. A text message from Dad appeared on my screen, a rare enough occurrence to immediately catch my attention. "Jessica, don't go to your mom's house. There's something you need to know first. Meet me at Riverside Hotel instead." I stared at the message, reading it 3 times to ensure I hadn't misunderstood. No explanation, no further details. Just a cryptic warning and directive from a man who had been barely present in my life for years. "What the hell?" I muttered, drawing a curious glance from the businessman seated across from me. Typical Robert Miller behavior. Creating drama without context was his specialty. I remembered my 16th birthday when he'd called to say he was sending something special that never arrived. Or the time he promised to attend my high school graduation, only to text an hour before the ceremony that his car had broken down halfway. Always big promises, always disappointing outcomes. My first instinct was to ignore the message. I'd been planning this homecoming for months, straight to Mom's house, surprising her with exotic gifts, eating her famous cinnamon rolls while catching up on everything I'd missed. Dad could wait until after I'd settled in, if I decided to see him at all. But an unsettling feeling nagged at me. Dad rarely reached out unprompted. For him to send this specific warning seemed uncharacteristic even for his melodramatic tendencies. I tried calling Mom, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a casual message. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Delayed in Atlanta, but should be home tonight. Love you." I purposely didn't mention Dad's text, not wanting to create unnecessary tension. Next, I tried calling Dad back. Voicemail again. I didn't leave a message. I sent a text instead. What's going on? Why shouldn't I go to Mom's? 3 dots appeared, indicating he was typing, then disappeared. No response came. My military training kicked in. Assess the situation, gather intelligence, make a decision based on available information. The information was minimal, but my instincts were firing warning signals. Something wasn't right. I considered my options as I watched families reunite at nearby gates, their embraces and tears highlighting my own solitary status. I could follow Dad's instructions and go to the hotel, potentially delaying my reunion with Mom for some unknown reason. Or I could stick to my original plan and go home, where I belonged. After internal debate, I decided to continue home. If there was something I needed to know, Dad could tell me directly rather than through cryptic texts. Mom was my priority. 7 hours later, my plane finally landed in Grand Rapids. The familiar small regional airport looked festive with garlands and twinkling lights. Christmas music played softly overhead as I collected my duffel bag from baggage claim. Despite my fatigue, excitement bubbled up. I was almost home. The taxi driver who picked me up was chatty, commenting on my uniform and thanking me for my service. I responded with practiced politeness while watching the familiar landscape pass by. The shopping mall where I'd had my first job, the park, where Mom and I used to walk rusty, the high school football field where I'd once played in the marching band. As we turned onto Oak Street, I felt a flutter of anticipation. Then confusion. The houses along Mom's street displayed elaborate Christmas decorations, inflatable snowmen, light displays synchronized to music, nativity scenes, all except one. Mom's house stood dark and undecorated, looking almost abandoned compared to the festive neighbors. "You sure this is the right address?" the driver asked, noticing my frown. "Yes, this is it," I confirmed, a knot forming in my stomach as I paid the fare. Standing on the sidewalk with my duffel bag, I studied our modest 2-story home. No wreath on the door, no lights along the eaves, no sign of the promised decorations. Mom's car wasn't in the driveway. I approached the front door, key in hand, when I noticed other details: uncollected newspapers on the porch, mail overflowing the mailbox. This wasn't right. Mom was meticulous about these things. I knocked loudly, irrationally hoping she might be inside despite the evidence otherwise. No answer. I was about to use my key when a voice called from next door. "Jessica, is that you?" Mrs. Thompson, our longtime neighbor, approached cautiously. She was bundled in a heavy cardigan despite the mild winter day, and her expression carried a weight that made my soldier's instincts snap to high alert. "Mrs. Thompson, hi. I'm looking for my mom. Do you know where she is?" Her face crumpled slightly, and she reached for my arm. "Oh, honey. You don't know, do you?" "Know what?" My voice came out sharper than intended, military authority replacing civilian courtesy. Mrs. Thompson flinched slightly, and I forced myself to soften my tone. "I'm sorry. It's been a long journey. What's going on with my mom?" Mrs. Thompson's hand trembled slightly against my arm. "She's in the hospital, dear. St. Mary's. She was admitted yesterday after collapsing at home." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. "Hospital? Why? What happened?" Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened. "The cancer, dear. Didn't she tell you?" The word hit like an IED explosion. Sudden, disorienting, devastating. Cancer? Mom had cancer? My mind raced through our recent video calls, searching for signs I might have missed. She'd looked tired, perhaps thinner, but she'd attributed it to end-of-semester stress at school. "When was she diagnosed?" I managed to ask, my training as a medic temporarily overriding my shock. "About 3 months ago. Stage 3 breast cancer. She's been having chemotherapy. Mrs. Thompson watched my face carefully. She really didn't tell you? I shook my head, struggling to process this information. And my father. He texted me today. Your father moved back about 6 weeks ago, Mrs. Thompson confirmed. He's been helping care for her, taking her to appointments, handling things around the house. He sold his business in Ohio, I believe. The world tilted further off its axis. Dad was back? Living here? Taking care of Mom? None of this made sense, with the reality I'd constructed during my years away. I need to go to the hospital, I said, military decisiveness returning. Right now. I can drive you, Mrs. Thompson offered, already reaching for her purse inside her door. The drive to St. Mary's passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Shock at Mom's illness, betrayal that she'd hidden it from me, anger that I'd been kept in the dark while deployed, unable to help, and confusion about Dad's sudden reappearance in our lives. She didn't want to worry you, Mrs. Thompson explained gently as we navigated traffic. Karen said you had enough to deal with overseas without carrying her burden, too. It wasn't her decision to make, I said, staring out the window. I'm a combat medic. I deal with life and death every day. I could have handled it. I think that's exactly why she didn't tell you, Mrs. Thompson replied. She knew you'd want to come home immediately. The realization struck painfully. Mom had sacrificed having me with her during treatment to ensure I completed my service. Commitment. It was exactly the sort of selfless decision she would make, and knowing that only intensified my anguish. St. Mary's Hospital loomed ahead, its windows glowing in the early evening darkness. Mrs. Thompson dropped me at the entrance, promising to retrieve my duffel bag from the porch and bring it later. The hospital's antiseptic smell hit me as I entered, familiar from my medical training, but now carrying sinister implications. At the information desk, I learned Mom was in the oncology ward on the 4th floor. The elevator ride felt interminable. Stepping into the oncology unit, I was struck by the contrast between the cheerful Christmas decorations and the somber reality they attempted to mask. A tired-looking nurse directed me to room 412. I paused outside the door, gathering courage. Through the small window, I could see a thin figure in the bed, connected to various machines. And beside the bed, slumped in a chair with his back to the door, was a gray-haired man I barely recognized as my father. I pushed the door open quietly. The beeping of monitors created a rhythmic backdrop to the scene. Dad turned at the sound, his eyes widening in recognition. "Jessica," he said, standing awkwardly. He'd aged dramatically, hair completely gray now, deep lines around his eyes, thinner than I remembered. He wore rumpled clothes that suggested he'd been there for hours, perhaps overnight. I ignored him, moving straight to Mom's bedside. The sight of her shattered my heart. Her once vibrant face was gaunt, skin sallow against the white hospital pillow. Her thick brown hair, so like mine, was gone, replaced by a colorful scarf, wrapped around her head. IV lines ran into her arms, and an oxygen cannula rested beneath her nose. But what struck me hardest was how small she looked, my fierce, resilient mother reduced to fragility. "Mom," I whispered, taking her hand, gently. Her skin felt paper-thin, the bones prominent beneath. Dad cleared his throat. "She's been in and out today. The medications make her drowsy." I continued to ignore him, focusing entirely on Mom. What exactly happened, and why didn't anyone tell me? Before Dad could answer, a doctor entered. Dr. Wilson, according to her name tag. She seemed surprised to see me. "You must be the daughter. Karen has mentioned you many times." "Staff Sergeant Jessica Miller," I confirmed, automatically straightening my posture. "I need to understand my mother's condition." Dr. Wilson glanced at Dad, who nodded. She consulted the chart before speaking. "Your mother was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer 3 months ago. The initial treatment plan involved chemotherapy to shrink the tumors before surgery. Unfortunately, she's had severe reactions to the chemo, and yesterday she collapsed from dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. We're stabilizing her now, but her body is weak from fighting both the cancer and the treatment. My medical training helped me process the information clinically, separating it from the emotional impact. Prognosis? Dr. Wilson's expression grew guarded. We're exploring alternative treatment options. The current protocol isn't producing the results we'd hoped for, and it's taking a significant toll on her quality of life. What about the Carsons? Protocol? I asked, referring to an experimental treatment I'd read about in a medical journal. It's showing promising results for aggressive breast cancers. Dr. Wilson looked impressed. We've discussed it, but insurance won't cover experimental treatments, and it's prohibitively expensive. I nodded, mind already calculating possibilities. My combat pay had accumulated substantially with few opportunities to spend it deployed. As Dr. Wilson left, promising to return later, Mom's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she seemed confused, then recognition dawned. Jessica? Her voice was barely a whisper. You're not supposed to be here yet. I leaned close, squeezing her hand gently. I'm home, Mom, for Christmas, just like we planned. Tears filled her eyes. I wanted the house decorated. Everything perfect for you. Don't worry about that, I assured her, my own eyes burning. I didn't want you to see me like this, she continued, distress clouding her features. You have enough difficult images in your mind from your service. Mom, I said firmly, medic voice replacing daughter voice. I'm exactly where I need to be, and I'm not going anywhere. Her eyes drifted to Dad, standing awkwardly at the foot of the bed. Robert has been helping me. He's been wonderful. I felt a complex surge of emotions, gratitude that she hadn't been alone, confusion about their apparent reconciliation, and lingering anger at being excluded. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. Mom's eyes filled with tears again. You were saving lives in a war zone, sweetheart. The last thing you needed was to worry about me. That wasn't your decision to make, I said, echoing my earlier words to Mrs. Thompson. Dad stepped forward. It was my idea, he admitted. I convinced Karen we shouldn't tell you until your deployment ended. I thought I was protecting you too. I finally looked directly at him, years of resentment bubbling up. Like you protected me by disappearing from my life? Mom's hand tightened weakly around mine. Jessica, please, not now. The monitor beside her bed beeped as her heart rate increased. Immediately, my anger receded, replaced by concern. You're right, I said, softening my tone. Rest now, Mom. We can talk later. As she drifted back to sleep, I turned to Dad. I got your message at the airport. This is what you wanted to prepare me for? He nodded, looking older than his 54 years. I didn't want you walking into the house, finding it empty, not knowing what had happened. I thought I could explain first, help you prepare. For the first time, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the coffee cups piled on the side table, the wrinkled clothes suggesting he'd been here for days. How bad is it, really? I asked quietly. Medical professional to medical professional, parent to parent. Dad ran a hand over his face. Worse than they're saying. The cancer has spread to her lymph nodes. The conventional treatments aren't working well, and they're destroying her quality of life. I absorbed this, looking back at Mom's sleeping form. In that moment, I made a silent promise. I would do whatever necessary to help her fight this. And for now, that meant setting aside my complicated feelings about Dad's reappearance. I need to know everything, I said firmly. From the beginning, no more secrets. The next morning arrived after a restless night spent in the hospital recliner. I'd insisted Dad go home to shower and change, partly because he genuinely needed it, and partly because I needed time alone with Mom. She'd awakened briefly during the night, and we'd spoken softly in the darkness, small talk mostly, avoiding the elephant in the room until we were both stronger. When the oncology team arrived for morning rounds, I stood at attention, notepad ready. 4 years as a combat medic had taught me to be assertive in medical situations. My uniform was wrinkled from sleeping in the chair, but it still carried authority. "I'll be coordinating my mother's care from now on," I informed Dr. Wilson and her team. "I need complete access to her records, treatment plans, and all options being considered." Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course, though you'll need your mother's permission." Mom, more alert this morning, signed the forms without hesitation. "Jessica knows what she's doing," she told the doctors proudly. "She saved lives in conditions you can't imagine." Within hours, I'd reviewed Mom's complete medical file, researched her specific cancer type, and developed questions about treatment alternatives. When Dad returned, freshly showered but still exhausted looking, I was on my 3rd cup of hospital coffee and surrounded by printouts. "The Carson protocol is her best option," I said without preamble. "It's showing 68% response rate in cases like hers." Dad set down the fresh clothes and toiletries he'd brought for Mom. "We've explored that. Insurance won't cover it, and it costs nearly $80,000. "I've got combat pay saved," I said. "Almost $30,000. We can find the rest." Dad shook his head. "Jessica, I've already sold my business in Ohio. I got a fair price, but most of it's gone to medical bills already. The conventional treatments alone have cost." "You sold your business?" I interrupted, genuinely surprised. The construction company had been his life's work, his identity for as long as I could remember. "What else could I do?" he asked simply. It was Karen. The implication hung between us. After all these years, despite their divorce, he'd sacrificed everything when Mom needed him. It complicated the narrative I'd constructed about his abandonment. Our conversation was interrupted. When Mom returned from her morning scan, looking exhausted from just that small exertion, a nurse helped settle her back into bed. "We were just discussing treatment options," I said, taking her hand. Mom smiled weakly. "Always my little problem solver." "The Carson protocol," I began. "Is too expensive," Mom finished firmly. "And I'm tired, Jessica. So tired of being sick from the treatments without getting better." "Mom, you can't give up," I said, alarm rising in my chest. "I'm not giving up," she replied. "I'm being realistic. And what I want most is a normal Christmas. With my daughter. Not more hospitals, not more sickness." I exchanged glances with Dad, seeing my own concern mirrored in his eyes. This wasn't the fighter I remembered. The day progressed with tense discussions about treatment approaches. Dad and I found ourselves on opposite sides, he supporting Mom's wish to prioritize quality of life, me advocating for aggressive intervention. Years of military medicine had taught me to fight death with everything available, while Dad had watched Mom suffer through months of debilitating treatments. "You haven't been here," he said during one heated moment in the hallway. "You haven't seen what the chemo does to her." "Because neither of you told me," I snapped back. A nurse passing by gave us a warning look, and we lowered our voices. "She wanted you to complete your service," Dad explained for the 10th time. "She was so proud of you, of what you were doing. She didn't want to be the reason you came home early." "That should have been my choice," I insisted. Our argument was interrupted by my phone ringing, my commanding officer checking on my arrival home. I stepped away to take the call, explaining briefly that a family emergency might require extending my leave. The sympathetic response reminded me of the military family I'd temporarily left behind. When I returned, Dad was speaking with a hospital administrator about insurance coverage. The conversation wasn't going well. "What's happening?" I asked. They're denying coverage for the next round of treatment, Dad explained. Frustration evident, saying it's not medically necessary at this stage. My temper flared. I'd seen this pattern with wounded veterans, bureaucracy interfering with necessary care. Stepping forward, I addressed the administrator directly. My mother has paid into her insurance for 25 years without a lapse. She deserves every treatment option available. I've seen men receive better medical care in desert field hospitals than what you're offering my mother. The administrator looked taken aback by my intensity. I understand your frustration, but policy limitations are killing my mother, I interrupted coldly. Fix it. Dad placed a restraining hand on my arm. Jessica, this isn't the battlefield. Isn't it? I challenged, but allowed him to guide me away. Later that afternoon, while Mom slept, I wandered to the hospital cafeteria for real food. The Christmas decorations throughout the hospital felt like a mockery, cheerful reminders of the holiday Mom had planned so carefully, now impossible. Plastic snowflakes hung from the ceiling while families faced their worst nightmares in rooms below. As I stood in line with my tray, someone called my name. Turning, I saw Brendan Taylor, a classmate from high school. He looked essentially the same, perhaps a bit heavier, but with the same easy smile and confident posture. Jessica Miller! Wow! Look at you in uniform. A real-life hero. His enthusiastic greeting felt jarringly inappropriate given my current reality. I mustered a polite nod. I heard you were in the army or something, he continued. How's that going? Fine, I said shortly, not elaborating on the complexities of military service or my current situation. Cool. So you home for Christmas? Big plans with the family? The question twisted something inside me. Not exactly. My mom's upstairs in oncology, stage 3 breast cancer. His smile faltered. Oh shit, I'm sorry, I didn't know. Neither did I until yesterday, I said flatly. Brendan shifted uncomfortably. Well, if you need anything. Thanks, I said, knowing the offer was empty. Politeness. We'd never been close. As he walked away, I realized he hadn't actually recognized me. Not really. He saw the uniform, not the person I'd become. Just as I'd only seen Dad as the man who'd left, not the man who'd returned when needed most. Returning to Mom's floor with my barely touched meal, I overheard Dad speaking with Dr. Wilson in a quiet corner. Realistic expectations, the doctor was saying. Without more aggressive treatment, we're looking at months, not years. And with the treatment? Dad asked, voice strained. Still no guarantees, but potentially longer. Better quality time. But she needs to want it, Mr. Miller. Your ex-wife is making her own choices here. I stepped back around the corner, processing what I'd heard. Months, not years. The timeline hit me with physical force. I'd imagined coming home to help Mom through treatment, perhaps extending my leave, but ultimately returning to my unit. Now I faced a completely different reality. The breaking point came later that day. Hospital staff had brought a small Christmas tree for Mom's room, a gesture intended to be kind, but which only emphasized what we were missing. I'd been awake for nearly 48 hours, running on caffeine and adrenaline. Dad and I had been tag-teaming Mom's care, barely speaking to each other beyond necessary communication. I went to the cafeteria for more coffee, feeling increasingly disconnected from reality. The Christmas music playing overhead, the smiling volunteers in Santa hats, the normality of everyone around me while my world collapsed. It became suddenly unbearable. The coffee cup slipped from my hand, hot liquid splashing across the floor, and something inside me broke. Tears came without warning, harsh sobs that I couldn't control. I slid down against the wall, uniform be damned, and covered my face with my hands. People stared. Someone asked if I needed help. I couldn't respond, couldn't explain that I'd held myself together through firefights and mass casualty events, only to fall apart in a hospital cafeteria. Then unfamiliar hands were guiding me up, leading me to a quiet corner. Dad. He said nothing, just sat beside me as I struggled to regain control. I've seen this before, he said finally. Combat stress. Reaction. Your body holding it together during the crisis, then crashing when you're somewhere safe. I looked at him through tear-blurred eyes. How would you know anything about combat stress? Vietnam, he said simply. Your grandfather. He came back different. Had episodes like this. It's partly why He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Partly why he'd failed as a father, as a husband. The revelation that he understood something so fundamental about my experience created an unexpected bridge between us. I don't know how to do this, I admitted, voice raw. I know how to treat traumatic injuries, evacuate casualties, maintain operational readiness. I don't know how to watch my mother die. Neither do I, Dad confessed. I'm making it up as I go. But we're both here now, Jessica. Maybe that's enough to start with. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation, but it was the first real conversation we'd had in years. And in that hospital cafeteria, surrounded by cheerful holiday decorations and oblivious strangers, we found a fragile common ground in our shared love for Mom and our shared helplessness in the face of her illness. Christmas Eve arrived with a biting cold front that brought the first snow of the season. From Mom's hospital window, we watched fat flakes dust the parking lot and cling to the branches of the bare trees. The weather matched the festive date on the calendar, but nothing else did. Mom's condition had stabilized enough that we discussed taking her home for the holiday, but her medical team advised against it. Instead, the nursing staff had gone overboard, trying to create Christmas spirit in her room. A slightly larger tree, paper snowflakes taped to the window, a small nativity scene on the windowsill. Their kindness only highlighted the wrongness of our situation. I need to get some things from the house, I told Dad that morning. Fresh clothes for Mom, her favorite blanket. What I didn't say, I needed a brief escape from the hospital's oppressive atmosphere, needed to see our home and process everything that had happened. Dad handed me his keys. Take my car. I'll stay with her. The drive to Oak Street was surreal. Christmas Day was tomorrow, but I felt completely disconnected from the holiday. Houses along the route displayed their festive decorations, families visible through windows preparing for celebrations. Normal life continuing while ours had derailed. At home, I used Dad's key to enter. The house felt abandoned, mail piled. On the table, dishes in the sink, a thin layer of dust on surfaces. Evidence of the chaos that had preceded my arrival. I gathered the items Mom had requested, her soft blue blanket, comfortable clothes, the lavender lotion she preferred. In her bedroom, I opened her closet to find a nightgown and saw her Christmas decorations boxed neatly on the shelf. She'd been planning to use them, had been saving them for my arrival. The realization triggered fresh grief. On her bedside table, I noticed a leather-bound book, Mom's journal. She'd kept one for as long as I could remember, writing in it each night before bed. I hesitated, respecting her privacy, but then picked it up. If there were insights into her condition, her wishes, I needed to know. I sat on her bed and opened to recent entries. October 17th. Started the new treatment today. The doctor is optimistic, but the side effects are brutal. Robert drove me home and stayed until I fell. Asleep? Strange having him here after all these years, but I'm grateful not to be alone. October 30th. Bad day. Couldn't keep anything down. Robert brought soup anyway, sat with me while I didn't eat it. We talked about Jessica. He's been following her. Career through a military contact. Knows about her commendations, her promotions. He's never stopped being proud of her, just stopped knowing how to show it. I paused, surprised by this revelation. Dad had been tracking my military career? Had been proud of me? It contradicted the narrative I'd constructed about his indifference. November 8th. The treatments aren't working as hoped. Dr. Wilson suggested more aggressive options, but I'm not sure I have the strength. What I want most is to see Jessica one more time, to have one more Christmas together. Robert says we should tell her now, bring her home early. But I can't bear to disrupt her service. She's doing important work. My illness shouldn't derail that. November 24th, Thanksgiving. Robert cooked a small turkey, though I could barely eat. We talked about past holidays when Jessica was small. He brought photo albums I hadn't seen in years. Pictures of the three, of us before everything fell apart. I've forgiven him for leaving, I realize today. Life is too short for old grudges. I flipped through more entries, reading about Mom's physical decline, her preparations for my visit, her hopes that she could hide her condition long enough to give me one normal Christmas. The final entry was dated just 3 days ago. December 21st. I pray for 2 things now. First, that Jessica forgives me for not telling her sooner. Second, that she and Robert find their way back to each other. They are so alike, stubborn, principled, afraid of vulnerability. My greatest regret is that my illness might be the only thing that brings them together, and that I won't be here to see their relationship heal. But perhaps that can be my final gift to them both. I closed the journal, tears streaming down. My face. Mom's perspective shifted something fundamental in my understanding of our family. Her forgiveness of Dad, her recognition of our similarities rather than differences, her hope that something positive might emerge from her illness. I gathered the items I'd come for, adding the journal to the pile. Back in the car, I sat for several minutes, processing what I'd read. Then I drove back to the hospital with new resolve. Dad was alone in Mom's room when I returned. She's having another scan, he explained. They're checking if the fluid around her lungs has decreased. I set down my bags and faced him directly. I found Mom's journal, I said, without preamble. She writes about you tracking my military career. Is that true? Dad looked startled, then resigned. Yes. How? Through what contact? Colonel James Harrington, Dad admitted. We grew up together in Ohio. When you enlisted, I asked him to keep me informed. Nothing classified, just how you were doing. If you were safe, your accomplishments. Why didn't you just ask me directly? I demanded. Dad sank into the bedside chair, suddenly looking every one of his 54 years. Because I didn't think I had the right. I walked away, Jessica. Not just from your mother, but from you. Why? The question contained 14 years of hurt, of wondering what I'd done wrong, why I hadn't been enough to make him stay. Dad's eyes met mine, then dropped to his hands. After the business failed, I fell apart, drinking too much, depression, though I didn't recognize it then. I felt like a failure as a provider, as a husband, as a father. Your mother suggested counseling, but my pride. He shook his head. When I left, I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. But the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to return. What could I possibly say to explain my absence? How could I face you after missing so much? So you just gave up on us? I asked, voice breaking. I gave up on myself, he corrected quietly, and convinced myself you were better off without me. A clean break rather than a father who kept disappointing you. The explanation was simultaneously inadequate and illuminating. I thought of soldiers I'd treated who'd refused to contact their families after significant injuries, believing loved ones were better off not seeing them damaged. Mom's journal says you two have been looking at old photos, talking about the past. Dad nodded. Karen never threw anything away. She kept every picture, every memory intact. For you, she said, so you'd have the complete story of your family, not just the broken parts. She wants us to reconcile, I said bluntly. It's in her journal, one of her final wishes. Dad looked up sharply. Final? Did the doctors tell you something new? No, but she's writing as though... I couldn't finish the sentence. She's a fighter, Dad insisted. Always has been. The journal says she's tired of fighting, I countered. That what she wants most is one last Christmas with me. The weight of this settled between us. Whatever our complicated history, we shared this immediate concern, giving Mom what she needed in the time remaining. Our conversation was interrupted by alarms blaring from the hallway. A code blue announcement echoed over the intercom, and medical personnel rushed past the door. With sickening certainty, I knew. Mom, I whispered, rushing into the corridor. The commotion centered on the imaging department, where Mom had gone for her scan. Dad and I ran toward it, only to be blocked by hospital security. That's my mother, I shouted, military authority in my voice. A nurse recognized us. Let them through. Inside the imaging room, organized chaos reigned. Mom lay on the scanning table, medical staff performing CPR. A doctor was administering emergency medications. The rhythmic beep of the cardiac monitor had been replaced by the ominous solid tone indicating no heartbeat. My combat medic training kicked in automatically. I assessed the situation, cataloging interventions already in progress, identifying what might be missing. How long has she been down? I asked a nearby nurse, voice steady despite my internal panic. About 2 minutes, she replied. She collapsed. During the scan. Dad stood frozen in the doorway, face ashen. I moved to his side. She's in the right place, I assured him, though we both knew cardiac arrest in a cancer patient carried grim implications. Time stretched as we watched the resuscitation efforts. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes without a pulse. The medical team worked with professional efficiency, but I could read the growing concern in their expressions. The longer CPR continued without response, the less likely recovery became. We need to call it, a doctor said finally, checking his watch. No, Dad protested, stepping forward. Please, don't stop. The doctor looked at him compassionately. Sir, we've been working for 15 minutes. There's no cardiac activity despite multiple medications. I knew the doctor was right. The rational medical part of my brain accepted the futility. But standing beside Dad, watching his desperate expression, I couldn't bear it. Try once more, I requested, stepping closer. One more round of epinephrine. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. One more round. The medication was administered. Chest compressions continued. The room held its collective breath. Then, a blip on the monitor. Another. A third. An irregular pattern emerged, strengthening gradually into a recognizable rhythm. We have a pulse, someone announced. The room exhaled. Not a victory, not yet, but a reprieve. Hours later, Mom lay in the ICU, connected to even more machines than before. She'd been stabilized, but remained unconscious. The medical team was cautiously pessimistic about her prognosis after such a significant cardiac event. Dad and I kept vigil on opposite sides of her bed. The Christmas Eve we'd envisioned, even the hospital version, had disappeared. Now we measured success in continued heartbeats, in stable oxygen readings, in the simplest signs of continued life. As midnight approached, marking the technical beginning of Christmas Day, Dad reached across Mom's still form and took my hand. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I'm grateful we're both here with her. And with each other. I didn't pull my hand away. In the sterile ICU room, surrounded by beeping monitors instead of Christmas carols, we formed a different kind of family circle, broken, imperfect, but present for each other in the moment that mattered most. Dawn broke on Christmas morning with pale light filtering through the ICU window. I'd dozed fitfully in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, waking at every change in the monitor's rhythm. Dad had stepped out to find coffee, his third trip of the night. Neither of us had left the hospital since Mom's cardiac arrest. The night shift nurse entered quietly to check vitals. "Her numbers are improving," she reported, genuine surprise in her voice. "Oxygen saturation is up, heart rate stabilizing." I straightened, instantly alert. "Any signs of neurological activity?" "The doctor will do a full assessment during rounds, but she's triggering the ventilator, which is a positive sign." After she left, I moved closer to Mom's bed, taking her hand carefully around the IV lines. "Mom, if you can hear me, it's Christmas. I'm here. Dad's here too. We're not going anywhere." A subtle pressure against my fingers, so slight I might have imagined it. But the cardiac monitor showed a corresponding increase in heart rate. She could hear me. Dad returned with steaming cups, looking haggard from the sleepless night. "Any change?" "She squeezed my hand," I reported. "And the nurse says her numbers are improving." For the first time in days, hope flickered across his tired face. He set the coffee aside and reached into the duffel bag he'd brought from home. "I brought this, just in case." He pulled out a small tabletop Christmas tree, not a hospital-issue decoration, but a family heirloom I recognized instantly. The ceramic tree with tiny colored lights had sat on our mantel every Christmas throughout my childhood. "Mom loves this thing," I said, surprised he'd remembered its significance. "I found it in the attic when I was looking for her winter clothes," Dad explained, plugging it in beside the bed. The colored lights glowed softly in the dim room. I thought it might feel more like Christmas." The gesture touched me unexpectedly. Dad had never been sentimental during my childhood. That had been Mom's department. This small act revealed a side of him I hadn't known existed, or perhaps one that had developed during his years away. The day progressed with cautious optimism. Mom remained unconscious but showed increasing responsiveness to stimuli. The ventilator settings were reduced as her breathing strengthened. Doctors expressed measured surprise at her resilience. "She's fighting hard," Dr. Wilson told us during afternoon rounds. "Harder than I would have expected given her condition." "She has something to fight for," Dad said, glancing at me. Around 4 o'clock, a nurse appeared with a small wrapped package. "This was at the front desk for you, Staff Sergeant Miller." The package contained a worn brass ornament shaped like a ballet slipper. I stared at it in disbelief. "Where did this come from?" Dad cleared his throat. "I've had it, since the divorce." I ran my finger over the tarnished surface. The ornament commemorated my brief childhood ballet phase, a Christmas gift from when I was 7. "You kept this? All these years?" "I didn't take much when I left," Dad admitted. "Just a few photos and this. It reminded me of you practicing your routines in the living room, so serious about getting the positions right." The revelation that he'd treasured this small connection to me throughout our years of estrangement cracked something inside me, not fully healing the breach, but creating an opening where there had been only solid wall. As evening approached, a commotion at the door drew our attention. A nurse entered, holding a tablet. "Staff Sergeant Miller, there's a video call for you." The screen showed a familiar face, Lieutenant Rivera from my unit, surrounded by other soldiers I recognized. "Miller," Rivera called. "Merry Christmas from the sandbox." My unit had arranged a surprise call, each member offering holiday wishes and asking about Mom. The effort they'd made to reach me across thousands of miles, coordinating around mission schedules and time differences, demonstrated the strength of my military family bonds. When the call ended, I noticed Mom's eyes were open, not fully alert, but conscious, watching me. "Mom?" I moved quickly to her side. She couldn't speak around the ventilator tube, but her eyes communicated volumes, recognition, love, relief, at seeing me. Dad joined us, taking her other hand. "Karen, it's Christmas. Jessica's here. We're both here." For a moment, the three of us were connected again. Not as we had been in the past, not as we might have been without the intervening years of separation, but in a new configuration shaped by our individual journeys and current reality. A doctor arrived to assess Mom's awakening, and the medical team soon determined she could be extubated. The process was uncomfortable but brief, and by evening Mom was breathing independently, though still requiring oxygen support. "Some Christmas," she whispered hoarsely once she could speak. "Best gift ever," I assured her, meaning her survival. She gestured weakly toward Dad. "You two talking?" Dad and I exchanged glances. "We're working on it," he answered. Mom managed a small smile. "Good." The next few days brought steady improvement. Mom remained weak but engaged, participating in decisions about her ongoing care. The cardiac event had complicated her cancer treatment options, but also created a strange opportunity. Her case now qualified for an experimental therapy program that insurance would cover. As Mom's condition stabilized, Dad and I established an uneasy routine, alternating hospital shifts and briefly returning to the house for sleep and showers. During one such trip home together, the first time we'd been alone outside the hospital, Dad suggested we tackle the house. "Karen would want it cleaned up," he said, "and maybe we could put up a few decorations for when she comes home." The optimism in his voice was infectious. Together, we addressed the neglected house, washing dishes, collecting mail, dusting, surfaces. In the process, we discovered common ground in our methodical approaches to tasks, our attention to detail. In the attic, searching for Christmas decorations, we found boxes of family photos. Some I recognized, others predated my birth. Mom and Dad's early relationship, their wedding, first home. "You were so happy," I observed, studying their young faces. "We were," Dad confirmed, "until we weren't." "What really happened?" I asked. Mom always said it was the recession, the business failing. Dad sat heavily on an old trunk, photo album in hand. "That was the catalyst, but not the real problem. After the business failed, I started drinking. Not just socially, seriously drinking. I'd had problems before, but always managed to control it. When we lost everything, I couldn't cope." "Mom never told me that part," I said quietly. "She was protecting you. And me, I suppose." He turned a page in the album. "I became someone else, angry, unpredictable. She gave me ultimatums about getting help. I chose the bottle instead." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "It wasn't about not loving you both enough. It was about not loving myself at all." The honesty of his confession disarmed me. "Are you still drinking?" "No. 8 years sober in February." He smiled faintly. "Too late to save my marriage, but not too late to become someone my daughter might eventually respect again." As we continued sorting through family artifacts, I began to see my father not as the mythologized villain of my adolescence, nor as the repentant hero of Mom's hospital room, but as a flawed human who had failed, suffered, and was attempting to rebuild. By New Year's Eve, Mom had improved enough for discharge planning. Her prognosis remained serious. The cancer was still advancing. But the new treatment protocol offered hope we hadn't had before. Dad and I sat with her doctors discussing home care options. "I want to come home," Mom insisted when presented with rehabilitation facility alternatives. "To my house, with my family." The word family encompassed Dad and me in a way that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. Somehow, in the crucible of crisis, we had formed a functioning unit, not healed, not whole, but bound by shared purpose and concern. That evening, as the year prepared to turn, we helped Mom to the hospital solarium where other patients and families had gathered to watch distant fireworks from the windows. She sat between us in a wheelchair, wrapped in blankets, thin but present. "Not exactly the Christmas we planned," she said softly. "We'll do better next year," I promised, the words emerging before I'd considered their implication, that there would be a next year, that we would be together for it. Dad placed his hand over Mom's on the wheelchair armrest. "Absolutely. No hospitals next time." As midnight approached and the first distant fireworks appeared, I felt my phone vibrate with a message. It was from my commanding officer. My request for a position at the military medical training facility in Detroit had been approved. I could transfer after my leave ended, remaining within driving distance of home while continuing my service. I showed the message to Mom and Dad. "I'll be staying in Michigan," I explained, "teaching combat medicine to new medics." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to change your plans for me." "I'm not," I assured her. "I'm adjusting them to include you. Both of you," I added, glancing at Dad. He nodded, understanding the significance of the inclusion. "I can help you find an apartment. I've been looking at places myself, actually. My sublet is ending next month." The implication was clear. He too was planning to stay, to continue being present in Mom's life, and potentially in mine. As the fireworks culminated at midnight, marking the symbolic fresh start of a new year, the three of us watched in silence. Not the joyous celebration we might have wished for, but a quiet acknowledgement of survival, of connection reestablished, of possibilities still ahead despite the shadows we faced. In that moment, I realized we had created something none of us had anticipated. Not a restoration of our former family, but the foundation of a new one, built on clearer understanding and deliberate choice rather than obligation. It wasn't perfect or complete, but it was real. And for now, that was enough. By late January, Mom had been home for 3 weeks. The house on Oak Street had transformed, not just with the belated Christmas decorations we'd finally installed, but with the evidence of our shared habitation. Dad's reading glasses on the coffee table, my military duffel in the spare room, medication schedules posted on the refrigerator, the three of us creating a new normal within the familiar walls. Mom's recovery progressed with agonizing slowness. Good days when she could join us for meals at the table. Bad days when she barely left her bed. The experimental treatment caused different side effects than the conventional chemotherapy. Less nausea but profound fatigue. Less hair loss, but concerning neuropathy in her hands and feet. I had extended my military leave to its maximum duration, postponing my start date at the Detroit training facility. Each morning, I helped Mom with her exercises, applying my medical training to her rehabilitation. Each evening, Dad took over, allowing me a few hours to run or visit the gym, physical outlets for the stress and worry that accumulated daily. "You can't put your life on hold indefinitely," Mom told me one afternoon as I checked her vital signs. Her nurse's visit had been canceled due to a snowstorm, so I was handling her care. "I'm not putting anything on hold," I countered. "I'm exactly where I need to be." She gave me a knowing look. "Jessica Miller, I raised you. I know when you're sacrificing for others." "Maybe I learned it from you," I said, adjusting her oxygen flow. "Keeping secrets about cancer so I wouldn't worry during deployment." She had the grace to look slightly abashed. "Fair point." The truth was, I had found unexpected purpose in this caretaking role. My combat medic skills, honed in environments of chaos and destruction, now served healing and comfort. It felt like completing a circle, using my training to care for the woman who had cared for me throughout my childhood. Dad had undergone his own transformation. The distant, emotionally unavailable father of my youth had been replaced by a man who anticipated needs, researched treatment options, and maintained the household with quiet efficiency. One evening, I came downstairs to find him baking Mom's favorite cookies, following a recipe she'd coached him through from her recliner. "You've changed," I observed, helping him arrange the cookies on a cooling rack. 14 years will do. That? He replied. So will nearly losing someone who matters. Is that why you came back? When she got sick? Dad considered the question. Partly, but I'd been working toward it for years, in my own way, getting sober, building a stable life, trying to become someone worthy of reconnection. He smiled, faintly. I just waited too long to make the final step. Why did you track my military career? I asked, the question that had lingered since finding Mom's journal. Because I was proud of you, he said simply. So proud it hurt, even when I didn't deserve to feel that pride. His honesty created space for my own. I joined partly to escape, I admitted, to get away from being the girl whose dad left. I'm sorry, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. I know, I replied. And I did. A significant moment came in early February when Dad invited me to attend an AA meeting with him. It's an open meeting, he explained. Family members welcome. I thought it might help you understand some things. I agreed, curious about this part of his life I'd never known. The meeting was held in a church basement, folding. Chairs, fluorescent lighting, coffee in styrofoam cups. Dad was greeted warmly by regular attendees, clearly an established member of this community. When he stood to speak, marking 8 years of sobriety, I saw yet another dimension of the man I was coming to know. His vulnerability in sharing his struggles, his gratitude for recovery, his acknowledgement of damage done to his family, all delivered with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. My daughter is here tonight, he said, glancing at me. For 14 years, I convinced myself she was better off without me in her life. It took her mother's illness to show me how wrong I was, how much time I'd wasted. His voice grew husky. If you're hesitating to reconnect with someone you've hurt, don't wait for a crisis to make the first move. Second chances aren't guaranteed. Later, driving home, I found myself asking questions about his recovery journey, his support system, his darkest moments. For the first time, I saw him as someone who had suffered and survived his own war, different from my combat experience, but no less formative. You could have told me sooner, I said as we pulled into the driveway. About the alcoholism, the recovery. It would have helped me understand. Pride, he admitted, and shame. Powerful deterrents to honesty. I thought about my own silences, the combat experiences I'd sanitized in letters home, the nightmares I'd never mentioned, the hardening I'd felt and hidden. I get that. February brought promising news. Mom's latest scans showed the experimental. Treatment was working. Not a cure, the doctors cautioned, but a significant response that could extend both quantity and quality of life. The timeline had shifted from months to potentially years. See? Mom said triumphantly from her treatment. Chair. I told you I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. You two are stuck with me. Dad and I exchanged relieved glances over her head. Whatever our complicated relationship, we shared absolute alignment in our desire for Mom's recovery. As my leave neared its end, Dad helped me search for an apartment near the training facility in Detroit, close enough for regular visits home, far enough to establish my own space. We spent a Saturday touring options, the activity feeling strangely normal, like something a father and daughter would typically do together. Over lunch at a diner between apartment viewings, Dad brought up a subject we'd both avoided. I've been thinking about your childhood Christmases, he said. The ones I missed. I pushed salad around my plate, uncomfortable with the topic. Ancient history. Not to me, he countered. Each one I missed feels like a separate failure. 14 Christmases, 14 birthdays, your high school graduation. College would have happened if not for your enlistment. Dad, I said, the word still feeling foreign in my mouth after years of avoiding it. We can't get that time back. I know, but I want you to know I thought about you during every one of those events. Wondered what you were doing, how you'd changed. Why didn't you just call or visit?" He stared into his coffee cup. The longer I stayed away, the more impossible return seemed. Each year, the wall got higher. He looked up. "It's not a good explanation, but it's the truth." I considered his words, recognizing echoes of my own behavior. How I'd maintained emotional distance even when physically present. How I'd compartmentalized my military life from my civilian identity. How I'd built walls of my own. "I understand." "Walls?" I said finally. "They feel like protection until you realize they're a prison." By mid-February, I prepared to report to my new assignment. Mom's health had stabilized enough that I could leave without constant worry, especially with Dad remaining in the house. The night before my departure, the three of us shared a special dinner. Mom's appetite good enough to enjoy her favorite, lasagna prepared by Dad from her recipe. "A toast," Mom proposed, raising her water glass since alcohol was prohibited with her medications. "To new beginnings." "To family," Dad added, his eyes meeting mine over the table. "To time," I contributed, "and using it better than we have before." The next morning, Dad drove me to Detroit. The car ride provided a final opportunity for conversation without Mom's mediating presence. "I've got the schedule for her treatments," I said, reviewing logistics. "I'll be back every weekend I'm not teaching, and the program director knows I may need emergency leave if—" "Jessica," Dad interrupted gently. "We'll be okay. You've set everything up perfectly. You need to focus on your new position, too." I nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. "It feels strange, leaving her, leaving you both." "You're not leaving," he corrected. "You're just expanding the radius. There's a difference." At the apartment building, he helped carry my minimal belongings inside. The space was small but functional. Military efficiency translated to civilian life. When everything was arranged, we faced the awkward moment of farewell. "So," I said, hands in pockets, "I guess I'll see you Friday evening." Dad nodded, then unexpectedly opened his arms. After a moment's hesitation, I stepped into the embrace. It felt unfamiliar yet somehow right, the first time we'd hugged since my early teens. "I'm proud of you, Jessica," he said gruffly. "Not just of your service or your accomplishments, of who you are, your strength, your capacity for forgiveness." "Still working on that last part?" I admitted. "Me too," he said. "Every day." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Dad, thanks for coming back, even if it took Mom getting sick." "I should have come back sooner," he said, regret evident in his voice. "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but you came back when it mattered most." Easter weekend brought another milestone, Mom's first outing beyond medical appointments since her hospitalization. The three of us drove to the lakefront park where we'd once picnicked during my childhood. The day was chilly but bright. Mom bundled in blankets on a bench while Dad and I walked along the shore, skipping stones like we had when I was small. "Remember when you taught me to find the flat ones?" I asked, selecting a smooth stone from the beach. "You were determined to beat my record," he recalled. 5 skips. I grinned, winding up and releasing the stone. 6 distinct bounces before it sank. "Apparently some skills improve with age," I observed. We returned to Mom, who watched us with evident satisfaction. "This is what I wanted," she said as we settled beside her. "Just this." The simple statement encompassed everything, not just the outing, but the reconstruction of our fractured family. Not erasing the past or pretending the years of separation hadn't happened, but building something new that acknowledged both the breaks and the healing. Looking out over the lake, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From the airport text that had upended my homecoming to this moment of precarious peace. From anger and resentment to cautious forgiveness, from isolation to connection. The path forward remained uncertain. Mom's cancer still posed a serious threat despite its temporary retreat. Dad and I were still learning how to communicate, how to be father and daughter after so many years as strangers. My military career continued to shape my identity and choices. But the essential lesson had been learned. Distance, physical, emotional, temporal, didn't negate love. It just made its expression more complicated, more precious when finally achieved. As we packed up to return home, Mom took my hand. "This wasn't the Christmas homecoming you expected," she said. "No," I agreed. "It was harder and more important." "Have you found what you were looking for?" she asked. "Coming home?" I considered the question, watching Dad load the car with careful attention to Mom's comfort. "I think I'm starting to understand that coming home isn't about returning to a place," I said finally. "It's about returning to people. Even when the people have changed, especially then." Mom squeezed my hand. "My wise daughter." "I had good teachers," I replied. "Both of you in different ways." That evening, as we sat together in the living room, Mom dozing in her recliner, Dad reading, me reviewing training materials for the upcoming week, I felt a sense of completion that had eluded me throughout my military service. Not because all problems were solved or all wounds healed, but because we were facing them together, no longer separated by pride, shame, or misunderstanding. The journey home had been nothing like I'd expected, but perhaps that was the point. Real homecomings weren't about returning to what was, but about discovering what could be. About building bridges across the chasms that time and circumstance had created. About forgiveness not as a single act, but as an ongoing practice. As the spring evening settled around our imperfect, struggling, resilient family, I recognized that some distances could never be fully crossed. But the effort to cross them, the reaching across empty spaces toward connection, was itself a form of homecoming. Have you ever experienced a homecoming that was completely different from what you expected? Or had to rebuild a relationship you thought was permanently broken? Share your story in the comments below. If this journey of healing and forgiveness resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to find your way home, even when the path looks nothing like you imagined. Thank you for listening to my story, and may your own journeys home, whatever form they take, lead to healing and peace.